Okay, Dave, WrestleMania 30 is the launch of the WWE Network. And for your subscription price, you got WrestleMania for free for the first time, for lack of a better term. What were the ramifications of this? What, when we look back on the history of the evolution of the WWE, will this night and this launch represent?
It will either be the growing pains to the fact to the making WWE as a company financially bigger than they ever were in the past, or it will be looked back as Vince McMahon's most costly decision of his life, even more than the XFL, far more than the XFL. It will be one of those two, and it's too early to say which one. So far, it's the wrong one, but it's still early. It's way too early in the game, and there's again there's going to be a mentality of people. I look at my own mentality. Like I have a number of subscription networks. Now, of course, my job forced me to do it, but I enjoy them greatly. I have my Fight Pass, which, when, every Saturday I get to watch my 2 matches, and once every month or so I get to watch a full card with no commercials, and it's cool, and they've lucked into the fact that these Fight Pass cards have been really entertaining. They've lucked into that. And I just find it's a great bargain. And I get to watch my WWE pay-per-views that I was going to buy anyway, whether they're good or bad. Some are really, really good, and some aren't. And I get my NXT shows. And again, even though this network has not been a success, for me as a fan, it's way worth my money. And then I watch my New Japan World, which is now my favorite, and that's well worth my money too. So I think the day is going to come where, more and more people will kind of, do that for their NFL and their NBA, and this is just part of their life, and they're not going to be averse to it. And in that time, whether that's 2 years from now or 4 years from now, and it's not a lock that WWE Network's still going to be a success, because they may erode the popularity of their product, or when everyone has it and you're only going to budget for some, maybe they're going to fall out, and maybe their hardcore fan base is just that 700,000, around the world. The rest of them that are fans are just like, well, if I'm going to pay for like 10 different sports, this isn't one of them. There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing how it's all going to play out when all is said and done. But it's going to be it's going to be this great success or a great failure. There's no in between.
Now, the first time the WWE announced a subscriber count, which is a highly sought-after figure, was after this show so that they could factor in everybody who signed up to check out WrestleMania for that discount price for the first time. And I'm not going to ask you, Dave, so much about your reaction of when you heard that sort of 687 some odd thousand subscriber number.
I think 667 was
667, thank you. 667,000 subscriber number, but that night, WrestleMania 30, after the show wrapped, how did you feel? Did you feel like it was the right move? Did you feel like enough people checked out the network to see this show that it was worth it?
I thought it was the wrong move to put WrestleMania on the network. I mean, from day one, I thought that the idea of 8 pay-per-views on the network or 6 pay-per-views, because, let's face it, the weaker shows were not doing gangbuster numbers anyway. So the idea when they first said, because the original idea was no pay-per-views on the network, then all of a sudden I started hearing pay-per-views on the network, and the number was 8. That was the original number, and I thought, risky idea, not a bad idea. I wasn't necessarily for it, but and then I heard. Then it became, we're going to put WrestleMania on the network, but only the first year. And I thought, well, you're going to lose you're not going to make nearly the money the first year. But, as far as launching the network, I didn't think that was a bad move, other than I thought, you're costing yourself 10, 20 million, but this network is, the potential upside of the network is pretty big. I was against it, but whatever. By the time the WrestleMania came, they backed themselves into the corner of every pay-per-view forever. And at that point, I thought that it was a huge mistake and I still do. I think that if they had done 8 pay-per-views on the network, they would get not quite as many subscribers, but close, because, the people that want it would still want. I mean, look at what the number is, and I don't know what the number is now, but right now on a month-to-month thing, if we find out what the number is, and if it's in the 700,000 range now, months away from WrestleMania coming up and months away from WrestleMania following, then that's their number. And I mean, granted, I know it will go up during WrestleMania month a lot, but it won't go up. It won't go up nearly as much as what your base is. Let's say your base is where it is now. The amount that that you would be at with no WrestleMania versus the amount of revenue that WrestleMania would bring in as a standalone event only on pay-per-view. I think that disparity is pretty huge in favor of keeping WrestleMania on pay-per-view with its 1 million plus worldwide. It's 1 million worldwide buys or more, as compared to whatever buys they still get, and even if it's a 1 million network subscribers, or even if it's 1.2 million network subscribers, it's 1.2 million at $9.99 versus 1 million at granted they don't get the whole 70, but they're getting 35. It's like the disparity is pretty damn huge.
Pretty damn huge. Now, what if for the listener who might not be initiated in all this and not understand why it was such a hit to the WWE? Essentially, what happens here is the companies that carry pay-per-views like DirecTV, Dish Network, and others say, so you're going to offer this show, which is one of the biggest pay-per-view things we do and one of the biggest moneymakers for us on our side, the distribution side, our half, and you're going to give it to people for $9.99 and cut us entirely out of the action. Well, you can forget about us carrying your pay-per-views at all anymore. And that really, Dave, is why it was such a gamble, right? Because the pay-per-view provider said, nope, it's not icing on the cake that you can get it on the network. This is now the absolute only place, and the WWE has to totally rely on people being convinced to subscribe to their digital network to even see their shows because of what happened in response in the industry.
Well, the in-demand, so the cable companies still carry it, but Direct and Dish didn't. They did not foresee that happening when they did it. Now, they did expect, they had a lot of expectations. They did expect, let's face it, they expected 1 million subscribers in the United States alone, and they're maybe half that, legitimately. And then they expected, 250,000 in the rest of the world, and they're not quite there. They're probably a little under that at this point. And then they expect to double those numbers in the next year, and I don't believe they're going to come anywhere close to that. And that would be where they would be making tons of money. Now, instead, they've slashed 35-40 million of the budget to where they'll probably break even next year, as opposed. But I mean, but the costs have been gigantic. Now, again, 5 years from now, it still may pay off. Right now, it hasn't. So I mean, but they expect, when they expected those numbers, they did expect everyone to switch over and that nobody would be buying it on pay-per-view at all, and some people still are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that they didn't expect, people still are, but in the transition time they did also not expect to be dropped, but they did figure that by December everybody would be signed up for the network. Like, WrestleMania would convince most, and then it would slowly trickle down. And then by, again, when they made their budget for 2015, their budget called for no pay-per-view revenue, but it also called for the amount of network revenue it called for in that original budget is a number that they are not coming close to.
Right. Yeah, and that's the gamble. That's the bluff call as far as the industry goes, and we'll see. We'll see, because it's either going to be a sink or swim proposition. There's no going back to the normalized way they used to do business on pay-per-view for all of these WrestleManias we've been talking about over 30 weeks here in the Lapsed Fans. So this is charting the course for the future.
Yeah. So the point and that's the key to the point, is what you just said. There is no going back. So this is a decision that literally, let's just say this decision is when all is said and done, this is a $50 million negative decision. Okay. Unlike, say, the XFL, which was, let's say, a $100 million. Well, no, they lost $68 million. It was a $68 million negative decision 1 year, and then it was gone, and then it's over, right? Or the World Restaurant, and they lost $35 million, and they probably
Take your
lost more
losses,
than
move
that.
on.
But you lost it and you move on. If this at a steady state, and when all is said and done, 2-3 years, you end up being $50 million worse than you were. It's $50 million every year forever that you've blown.
It's kind of funny, Dave.
And
I'm sitting here thinking about our very first conversation in this 30-week journey. We're talking about WrestleMania 1. We're talking about how much money they were out for closed-circuit theaters to screen the show in 1985 for Madison Square Garden, and how anxious they were that they were going to make up their investments, make up the debt obligations that they had as a result of the upfront money that it took to get the show out there in all those places, and sitting on eggshells, hoping that the returns came back, that it made sense, and they looked wise. Here we are, WrestleMania 30, and a similar risk being taken.
Yeah. But that one was a one-day thing. It's like WrestleMania 1. It was either going to make it or it wasn't, and it did. I mean, and they banked the whole company. This one, it's a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year thing. Perhaps in the long run, when we say those numbers, perhaps in the long run it was going to end up that way anyway. But perhaps not. I mean, I still believe. Again, like whether it's boxing or UFC, I still believe that the big fight, the Johns Jones Daniel Cormier fight is a recent example. Okay, I believe that whenever those fights come along, that they will not be on anyone's network. In 10 years from now, I don't believe, because it will not. You can make more than $9.99 per customer with a big fight. And I think that whether it's boxing or whether it's MMA and whether it's WrestleMania, all of those things should be standalone events, because people will pay, and they'll pay more as the years go by, especially for a WrestleMania, and especially for the big boxing and whatever, for all three genres, because the big event is going to become bigger and bigger every year, as long as the genre is still strong. Just like the Super Bowl, the number of viewers of the Super Bowl, and again, you don't pay to watch Super Bowl, but the number of viewers of the Super Bowl is probably going to stay, at that 100 million level for as long as we're alive, or maybe not as long as we're alive, but certainly the next 20 years. Okay, but the value of what they do pay, and that would be the live tickets to the Super Bowl game. Those Super Bowl tickets are going to be more and more expensive every single year.
Not to mention the advertising rates for the broadcast.
And the ad rates on the broadcast. This, because it's just the established, again, there's going to be, and in wrestling it's WrestleMania, and in fighting there's maybe 1 or 2 events per year, and it's not on a schedule, but they're there, but they're the big events. And in baseball it's the World Series, but baseball's popularity is falling. But the Super Bowl and the Final Four and the NBA playoffs and all that, it's like the value of those events, as tradition and history goes on, as inflation goes on, it's more every year. It's not less every year. And we're going to be seeing, again, we will see if someday, and I don't know when it's going to be, but we will see $100 pay-per-view price that's going to do business. Again, I don't know if it'll be, if Mayweather and Pacquiao last year or even this year have that fight, and they go $99.95, they're going to do, whatever, they're going to do their 2 million buys, even at that price. As much as people say they never will, and I'm not buying it, they will.
And here we have the WWE taking themselves out of that game.
Right, and then we have the WWE pricing their marquee event. And the thing is, as we've gone through history of WrestleMania, while WrestleManias go up and down based on, whether you have the Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, or The Rock and John Cena, or whatever, your giant match, Triple H and Dave Bautista. WrestleManias will go up and down, and the popularity of wrestling will go up and down. WrestleMania as a brand is far more valuable than it ever was, and it's just because cities are bidding for it. I mean, the ticket prices go higher and higher every year. I mean, the ticket prices this year are through the roof. I mean, so it's like the idea of, people don't even know what the card is for WrestleMania, and it's just the idea of going to WrestleMania. Before, in the first how many years, realistically, I mean, before WrestleMania itself drew no matter what, I mean, we're talking to 20 plus years. Now we're there to where you go in there and you have a lackluster show. You're still going to, the value of the name brand WrestleMania is huge, and they have taken it from a $70 show to a $9.99 show.
That's right. That is right. Well, let's get into this show here as we wrap up 30 remarkable weeks. WrestleMania 30 saw the end of the streak. That's right. 21-1. Brock Lesnar pins The Undertaker. Dave, how will history remember this outcome?
Do you think that's the most shocking moment in the history of WWE? I mean, I would say like, the two ones, that you would say, and is Bruno Koloff, but that's a completely different world, and that was, it's a different world, but that was, and then this one, and I think just because of the worldwide aspect and being on the stage of WrestleMania, that this was, as far as like, real impact. Outside of those people, those 20,000 people that were in the Garden that night that probably went monthly, and to them it was bigger because it was, Bruno was their, real cultural hero as opposed to a fantasy world hero. But in the big picture, this was much bigger. So this is the biggest shock moment that they ever had, that they ever produced anyway. I mean, maybe, there's shocks of the Ultimate Warrior dying or the Chris Benoit thing or whatever. But I mean, as far as something in the ring, the Owen Hart thing, I guess you could say would and that was in the ring. But I mean, as far as within the realm of the world of scripted professional wrestling, that was the biggest shock moment in history.
And why would they have possibly felt that Brock Lesnar was the guy?
I don't know if it was so much Brock Lesnar as it was time. I think that Vince saw the physical shape of Undertaker, and I think in his mind it was, I think this is the last one, and if it's the last one, he has to lose. And that's just the mentality, and a lot of people were against it. I am guessing that 99% of the people in that company were against it. And with the benefit of hindsight, I'm not sure he's wrong. I mean, and when I first watched it, there were people up in arms, and, the immediate reaction, because whenever something that you're sure is going to happen doesn't happen, you kind of get mad about it. A lot of people do. And I mean, there were people really, really upset in the company and all that, especially because they didn't know. The number of people who knew was what? I mean, I couldn't give you a number. It's probably 5, 6, 3. I don't know. The referee didn't know. So, I mean, that tells you, Vince knew, Triple H knew, Stephanie knew, Kevin Dunn knew, Brock Lesnar, Undertaker knew, Heyman, I think.
Well, ref must have thought he blew the call when his hand hit the mat a third time.
Well, he was told to call it as a shoot, so maybe he half-assed in the back of his head knew. They didn't tell him Undertaker was winning, but they didn't tell him that Brock was winning either. They said call it as a shoot. Now, I don't know how you take that, and I don't know if anyone's talked to him about it. What he was really thinking, but so they they had it. But when it was all again, when you look back, if it was Undertaker's last match, then it's probably better you had that moment than you never had that moment, because I think that moment was a great moment to have in the history of professional wrestling. We're never gonna, they don't have enough patience to do a storyline for 21 weeks, let alone 24 years? How many was the first WrestleMania was it 92?
As far as the first WrestleMania win for him was 1991 against Snuka.
Okay, 1991, and this is 2000, so 23 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's never going to happen again. They're never going to be able to do this. I mean, God knows that the Bill Goldberg streak was like a 1-year thing, and God knows nobody's going to ever have the patience to do that one again and make it work. So I think from a historical perspective, I think it was good that moment happened. Brock is just the guy who happened to be there when the call was made that this is probably the Undertaker's last match. Now, it may not be, but I think that was the idea, and he just happened to be the guy, and that's what it was. And, then they wanted to follow up by making him champion, and I think that was a good idea too. ever since he won the title. I think they've completely botched it, but that's the way it goes.
When Steve Austin asked Vince McMahon about this decision on his podcast, the first thing out of Vince's mouth was Undertaker. Nobody wants to give back to the business more than the Undertaker. Would you read into that what I do, Dave, that basically Vince looked at the whole complement of the roster and thought, and no, this requires a bit more foresight than is appropriate because it seemed like a late game call. But Vince looks and thinks, if anybody is going to actually make us money off the steam of beating Undertaker, it's Brock Lesnar. And
also here's the other one. Also justify the money that we're paying Brock Lesnar.
Right, he can come and make the return that justifies that. I mean, to me, that's the calculation more than anything, or at least that's the calculation that puts it over the top to where you actually execute and put Brock over. It's like, okay, all of these factors about Undertaker's health, plus the fact that we actually can put enough steam on Brock that his matches will be big enough that we'll make a return, but he's doing it in a network world. And on that night, it's a new frontier. This is the first show they've done like that. But as the months go, it's like, oh my God, how are you actually going to make this money?
Well, here's another one. I think the network is also part of the decision making. Number one, if it was if he thought that this was Undertaker's last match and it was CM Punk, what do you think the decision is?
We'll see how you do next year, Mark. Just pin his ass.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I think that if it's CM Punk in there, if it's Daniel Bryan in there, if it's anyone but maybe John Cena and probably not John Cena. 'Cause you know what? And if it was John Cena, he would be the one that I would say absolutely not, no matter what, under any circumstances, because John Cena beating Undertaker would be worse than Hulk Hogan losing to the Ultimate Warrior for the career.
Yeah.
Because if there was anything that would make the people turn on John Cena worse, it would be him beating Undertaker. Yeah. I think that would have been the worst. If it was Undertaker's last match and it was John Cena, and Undertaker had to win. But Brock Lesnar and he's the other one. If people hated Brock Lesnar for beating him, that's good. You know what I mean? And if it was anyone else, Vince wouldn't have done it. But again, I think the fact it was the first show on the network, I think that part of the mentality is, okay, however many people are getting this thing or not getting this thing, and remember, we don't know the number, right? Vince knows the number, and he knows it's not good compared to what he expected. The number is low. They had their expectations of where they were going to be, and this number is lower than they expected.
So let's make them regret that they didn't check this out.
That will and make them. What can we do? There is nothing possible in the history of this business that you could do. If anything can make you buy a replay of a show, or order the network to see a replay of the show, and beating the Undertaker. I don't care if you have a 5-star match that people are going that this is the greatest match and you got to see it. That doesn't mean anything because we see great matches every month. But beating the Undertaker, that's once in a lifetime. And I think that that's also part of the decision of my numbers aren't good. And everyone who misses it, they're going to be pissed. And they're going to sign up the next day and go, I've got to actually see this with my own two eyes. So I think all those things played into it. But I think if Vince thought that Undertaker was going to be back the next year, I think he beats Brock.
The show closing scene at WrestleMania 30 is Daniel Bryan hosting the two championships up in the air, confetti falling. He beats Triple H in a one-on-one match early in the show, comes back and beats Batista and Randy Orton in a three-way to close the show. This was not the original plan, as has been well documented, Dave, but for posterity's sake, let's review. Batista is brought back to the organization, signs a contract. We talked in our WrestleMania 21 installment about how much steam there was on Batista at one point in time, how successful his push was, how he was positioned even a tier above John Cena in terms of being a dominant face of the company champion. So they finally get him back. He pops a good rating for his return on Raw. And as part of that deal, he's supposed to win the Royal Rumble in 2014, go to WrestleMania, and become WWE champion. We get to the Rumble, and something dramatically different happens. So what are the high points that you recall of how we go from that plan and that agreement with Dave Batista to Daniel Bryan winning the championship at WrestleMania 30?
Well, if ever there was something like, when we talked about the Rey Mysterio win a couple of years back, that was one where it was the writers and Pat Patterson and everyone forcing Vince's hand, and Vince ended up, having to be right at the end. And you know what? If Daniel Bryan hadn't gotten hurt, he was going to be right at the end on this one too.
Oh yeah.
Daniel Bryan would have been a flop. Daniel Bryan was going to be a flop as a champion, and he was going to, and the end result was going to be, if he hadn't gotten hurt, was that he's the one in the ring taking those 17 German suplexes and getting squashed in a one-sided match by Brock Lesnar, but not getting the return. Then John Cena gets the return. He wasn't getting the return. That was going to be it. You were going to get your 3 months of Kane and all that, and the bad stuff that you got, and then it was going to culminate with Brock Lesnar, and that's what it was going to be, because he was going to be right at the end. But it didn't happen that way. So, I mean, as far as Daniel Bryan was going to wrestle Sheamus on the card, he was an afterthought, CM Punk was going to be wrestling Triple H, and Dave Bautista was going to wrestle Randy Orton in the main event, and that was going to be it, and win the championship, and Drax the Destroyer was, going to go on and be Drax the Destroyer in this big movie, and he's going to be our world champion, and that was going to happen. And, the funny part of the whole thing is Drax the Destroyer ended up being bigger than anyone than they ever thought, right? Than anyone ever thought, because nobody knew how this movie. I mean, they knew the movie would be a hit, but I don't think the people in WWE, number one, really knew how big the movie was going to be. I mean, I think some people did, but they're not exactly into that pop culture thing, and certainly nobody had the idea that Dave Bautista would end up being as good as he did. So good, in fact, that I don't know that we will ever see Dave Bautista wrestle.
Right, that's the thing. So good that he's going to keep getting better and better offers, and it won't be this thing where he's looking to come back to wrestling right after the movie.
Well, he was looking anyway. I mean, his mentality was he was going to come back and wrestle Triple H at this year's WrestleMania, and obviously that's not going to happen. And you don't hear his name. I think we've seen his last match. Maybe he'll come back for, again, it could be, you don't want to say never. Maybe, 2 years from now, it'll be like The Rock, where it's like, you know what, I'm 47 years old. If I'm going to do a comeback match, or, maybe even next year at Texas Stadium. It's like, you know what, if they're going to really do 100,000 people at Texas Stadium, and I got some time off, maybe I can do my match with Triple H and end my career with a match with Triple H, putting him over. Because that's what he wants to do, or, so, and in this year, obviously, that's not going to be the case. So maybe he'll do one match, but he's never coming back as far as, whatever, full-time pro wrestler. I don't think that we're ever going to see that, which is ironic, because this was going to be, last year was supposed to be his big, the kickoff of that. So he comes back, and if it wasn't for the Daniel Bryan thing, I really don't believe that people turn on Batista the way they do. I think that the people resented Batista because it wasn't Daniel Bryan that won. That said, Batista and Randy Orton still wasn't going to be the match. It was, under any circumstance, I don't think it was going to be the match that the big match that they thought it was going to be. I think they completely miscalculated there. So Punk leaves, and the people resent, and there's an opening, so they're going to go with Punk and Daniel Bryan, and they realize that they go with not Punk and Daniel Bryan, but Triple H and Daniel Bryan. So they go with Triple H and Daniel Bryan, and I think there's this realization that if they go with Batista and Randy Orton to close the show with the championship, that the people are going to turn on both guys, and it's going to be the modern version of Bill Goldberg and Brock Lesnar, and it would have been, without a doubt. That's what it would have been that night. And they had no choice. There was only one choice, and they did the one choice. But like I said, Vince was going to get I believe Vince was going to get his way at the end, and before Daniel Bryan went down with the injury, we were already seeing it. It was already happening.
And finally, on WrestleMania 30, it's impossible to talk about the show without mentioning one of the most eerie chain of events to ever happen, kind of under the WWE auspices. The Ultimate Warrior, after years sort of in exile, after splitting fractiously from Vince McMahon in 1996, did a brief stint in WCW in 98, but we chronicled through WrestleMania 12 on The Lapsed Fan that period where he came in and was gone just as quickly, is back. And Triple H, who now is the guy who Warrior squashed at WrestleMania 12, has now ascended to a position of significant authority in the WWE and sort of brokers the deal, plays peacemaker, and gets Ultimate Warrior to agree to come back, sign the merchandising agreement, and get inducted into the Hall of Fame the night before WrestleMania 30 here. Warrior gets inducted, does his speech, comes out on the stage the next night at Mania, waves to everybody, does an appearance the next night on Monday Night Raw, a stirring speech, an eerie speech in retrospect in terms of some of the messaging there about death and spirit, and he gets off the plane, gets out of his hotel the next morning in Arizona, walking with his family in the parking lot, collapses, and dies. And it was just a dizzying set of circumstances, because so much had happened so many chapters had closed and opened in the Ultimate Warrior story that weekend, Dave. And how do you remember hearing about what had happened and just processing that rather remarkable chain of events here attached forever to WrestleMania 30 weekend?
That was, yeah, that was just crazy. I mean, it was just like, that was like complete disbelief. I mean, if, like when Randy Savage passed away, he'd been kind of out of the public eye. And, the Randy Savage death, as far as a mainstream media story, was much bigger than the Ultimate Warrior death. But I think to a wrestling fan, the Randy Savage death was a surprise, but we've been through, anyone who's a wrestling fan has been through so many deaths, of people that you saw on TV the week before, of people that you saw on TV a few years earlier, of people that were in their late 20s, in their 30s, in their early 40s. So this was a death of someone in their mid-50s, not as unusual, but you hadn't seen him for years, and then Sunday you see him. Saturday night you see the big speech. Sunday you see him. Monday he comes out there, and he doesn't look healthy. I know he didn't look healthy, but you don't think about anything. And then Tuesday night, you know what I mean? Freaking Tuesday night. It's somebody. I'm trying to remember what somebody called me up and just goes, "Did you see what Triple H tweeted?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said no. And so look at it, and it's just like, my first thought is like, God, what, it's like I had like 10 million thoughts, but it was like, this is not a practical joke. I mean, I knew, like people going like, do you think it's like some sort of a joke? And I go, this is absolutely not a practical joke. But I didn't believe that he died either. I didn't know what to believe. And I, immediately contacted someone in WWE, and they immediately got back to me and said, yeah, that's what happened. But when I first heard it, I thought that somebody with a fake Triple H account, right? You know what I mean? It's like, you just don't believe it right away. But when I saw it was the real Triple H account, it's like, well, there's no way he's joking, so it's got to be true. But my God,
And they had patched things up. I mean, for all intents and purposes, there's the photo of him and Vince smiling. They had a big embrace. They did a fantastic documentary on how it all came together. That's what was the kind of the darkest part of it, in a way, is that there was so many reconciliations. There was so many loose ends tied up in the hours before this happened, that it was eerie to everybody. That it's almost like he was on like this final walk, this final this final line of handshakes there on his way to the grave.
I mean, it's almost like a movie.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, when the whole thing, especially because every, and again, when they showed that doc, but it's like they were following him around the last weekend of his life for all of his goodbyes on camera in real life, but nobody knew it was his goodbyes. It was, it was his hellos, but it was really his goodbyes.
There it is.
And even the Hogan thing, that wasn't supposed to happen. It's like, the whole thing of telling Hogan to stay away from him, and Hogan just, double crossing them and not, and then it ended up being what it was, with those two guys saying whatever they said. And, it was just, there was so much to it. Even like the Bret Hart thing, with Bret avoiding him because Bret didn't want to be the phony like everybody else, pretending to like him when they all hated him. I mean, and I heard that from other, again, I mean, as that weekend was going, I mean, I knew guys going like, you won't believe this. This is the phoniest you've ever seen wrestling. And I go, what do you mean? And it's like all these guys who hated this guy, and they're just, they're all pretending, and, and maybe he's pretending too. I mean, that's what people were saying, but again, perhaps people changed their tune. Perhaps they were real, but if you've heard it for 20 straight years, and I mean with Triple H, let me throw the Triple H thing. With Triple H, I think of anyone in wrestling, there's probably nobody he would say for years was more unprofessional because of what happened at that WrestleMania than Warrior. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that when they finally did all that they were not friends at the end. I mean, they very well, when they negotiated that deal, they may have, that happens in real life. You do put bygones behind you. You know, you don't hold resentment forever. I mean, some people do and some people don't. But I mean, it's just the guy that, let's face it, for all those years, I mean, how many times do you hear about, you know, number one, what happened in that match that they had at the WrestleMania between Triple H and Warrior, where Triple H, you know, all excited. He's in this big WrestleMania match. You know, he's young on his way up. And, you know, he's getting to work with this guy. And, you know, knowing his role is to lose, but, you know, you can go in there and have a memorable match, and the guy just won't work with him at all, right? Just not at all. Just shuts you down. It's 90 seconds. You're getting no offense. Boom, boom, boom. This is how we're doing it. It's like, well, how about this? This, you know, would not work with him one bit, okay? On this big stage for this. Again, Triple H was not a big star yet. He was on his way up, and that happened. And there's, you know, there's going to be resentment. But that's not to say that, you know, years later, Triple H is probably far more comfortable with his legacy, and he's running the, you know, he's the guy, the heir apparent running the company, and now it's a business decision, you know, bringing back Bruno, bringing back Warrior, you know, forget about personal, it's about what's the right thing for business, and obviously bringing back Warrior was the right thing for business, obviously. So you do it, and you know, Warrior, who knows what's in his head? You know, it's like, did he know this was coming? And you know, there's always that thing. Did he know this was coming? And that's why he was so willing, you know, and that makes a good story and everything, but I don't believe it, just so you know.
Yeah.
I don't believe it because I do know the circumstances of him coming back. And, you know, it's almost like the Daniel Bryan championship run, you know, where, you know, people will go back and just go, wow, you know, what, you know, maybe 30 years from now, people will go back and go, boy, that was a great storyline, one of Vince's best ever. You know, they beat him and beat him and beat him for a whole year. And then at WrestleMania, he has to win the two matches, you know, with Triple H, who's been screwing with him for all, you know, and representing the authority and all that. And then he goes in there and wins a three-way against the two big guys. And, you know, look at that pop, you know, if you watch the tape back. I mean, it's really impressive. And then, you know, you look back and you go like, you know, it was, you know, what a great thing. With Warrior, this was not any, you know, this was such a fluke that was supposed to happen. You know, it was, you just wouldn't even believe what you know, I can't even tell you. Someday the story will probably come out. Let me just say that this was such a complete fluke that this ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it did.
It certainly did, and it came to a sad and fascinating end as part of WrestleMania 30. And Dave, we're wrapping up here. What is your favorite WrestleMania? Doesn't have to be the best one, but what is the WrestleMania you want on a deserted island?
17.
No question, no hesitation.
No, 17. Just to me, that was the high point. The right main event, right undercard, up and down, peak of the popularity. It had a little bit of everything. You know, I mean, if it, you know, it didn't have the greatest match. If you said one match, I would probably go Bret Austin and Undertaker Shawn, and Shawn Kurt Angle. I would. You know, I would not say the Benoit match because I probably will never watch it again. You know, I still only watched one Chris Benoit match, and that was by accident because New Japan played it during an intermission of a pay-per-view. So, but you know, but yeah, 17.
Well, Dave, you know, I can remember you telling me about going to the wrong person's house trying to find WrestleMania 2 back in '86, talking to Flair about WrestleMania 8 and him thinking he's working Hogan, thinking you're going to have to find something else to do, and WCW folded around the time of WrestleMania 17, and the hell that was your life when Chris Benoit passed when we were discussing WrestleMania 20. I can't say much more than thank you for lending your memories here to the Labs Fan 30-week project. It was invaluable to have your perspective and reflections, and thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome. I loved it. I loved looking back. It's absolutely, when you look back, what an amazing thing. I don't think we could go through 30 Super Bowls and have the stories that we had here.
Not even close. So, on to WrestleMania 31. What do you say?
God, it's in my hometown. Down the street, practically.
Well, enjoy it, and thank you once again.